The stagecoach lurched to a halt outside the telegraph office in Ruby City, Idaho Territory, and Sophia Greenfield gripped her leather satchel tight enough to leave marks on her palms, as dust settled around the wheels like a whisper of everything foreign awaiting her in this rough frontier town. It was July 1882, and she had traveled over 2,000 miles from the Agricultural Sciences Department at Cornell University with one singular purpose: to conduct comprehensive soil quality assessments across Idaho Territory for a government-funded expansion project. At 24 years old, she was one of only 3 women in the entire department, and this assignment represented everything she had worked toward since convincing her professors that a woman could handle field work just as competently as any man. The heat pressed against her traveling suit like a physical weight as she stepped down from the coach, her boots finding purchase on the sun-baked earth. Ruby City sprawled before her in a collection of wooden structures that seemed to lean into each other for support, the main street cutting through the settlement like a scar. Horses tied to hitching posts swished their tails against persistent flies, and somewhere a blacksmith's hammer rang out in steady rhythm. Miss Greenfield, a middle-aged man with spectacles and a clipboard, approached, extending his hand in greeting. "Harold Winters, Territorial Land Office. We received your telegram last week." Sophia shook his hand firmly, noting the surprise that flickered across his features at her grip. "Thank you for arranging lodgings, Mr. Winters. I trust the property owners I'll be assessing have been notified of my arrival. About that." Winters shifted his weight, glancing down at his clipboard. "We've had some resistance from a few of the ranchers. They don't take kindly to government interference, especially not from someone they consider an outsider. I'm here to help them understand their land's capabilities, not interfere with their operations." Sophia kept her voice steady despite the flutter of anxiety in her chest. She had anticipated resistance, but hoped professional courtesy would prevail. Winters nodded toward a building with a faded sign reading Morrison's Boarding House. "You'll stay there. I've compiled a list of properties, starting with the smaller homesteads and working up to the larger ranches. Fair warning, though, Miss Greenfield. The biggest spread around these parts belongs to Coleman Vance, and he's already sent word he won't allow any government representative on his land." The name settled in Sophia's mind like a stone dropping into water. Why not? Coleman lost his father 3 years back to what he considers government overreach. Tax collectors seized part of their southern pasture over a disputed assessment. He's been hostile to anyone with official papers ever since. Winters led her toward the boarding house, her trunk being unloaded behind them. "He runs 10,000 acres with the best water rights in the county. If you're serious about comprehensive soil assessment, you'll need access to his land." Sophia's jaw set with determination. "Then I'll have to convince him otherwise." The boarding house room was small but clean, with a single window overlooking the street and a wash basin on a corner table. After Winters departed with promises to introduce her to some of the more cooperative homesteaders the next morning, Sophia unpacked her equipment with careful precision. Glass vials, measuring instruments, sample bags, her leather-bound notebook filled with annotation methods and classification systems. Each item represented hours of study, debates with skeptical professors, and her unwavering belief that understanding the earth beneath their feet could transform how people worked the land. She spent the evening reviewing her maps and notes by lamplight, marking potential sample sites based on topographical surveys. Coleman Vance's property dominated the eastern section of the county, sprawling across valley floors and climbing into foothills where mountain runoff created the kind of soil stratification that would be invaluable for her research. Excluding it would leave a significant gap in her data. The next morning arrived with characteristic frontier intensity, the sun climbing fast and turning the air thick before most people finished breakfast. Sophia dressed in her field clothes, practical split skirts that had raised eyebrows back east but proved essential for traversing rough terrain, and a cotton blouse she could move freely in. She braided her dark blonde hair tight against her skull and secured her wide-brimmed hat with a leather cord. Harold Winters introduced her to 3 homesteaders that first day, small-scale farmers working rocky soil with more hope than expertise. Sophia collected samples, tested drainage, measured pH levels with her portable kit, and filled pages with observations. The farmers watched with varying degrees of suspicion and curiosity as she worked, this Eastern woman kneeling in their fields with scientific instruments, explaining concepts like nitrogen depletion and mineral composition in terms they could understand. "Your western slope is actually your best bet for wheat," she told a weathered farmer named Thomas Perry, holding up 2 soil samples for comparison. "See how this one clumps better water retention." The eastern section would do well with legumes to restore nitrogen, then rotate to wheat in 2 years. Perry scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Doc at the land office said this was all poor quality, recommended I sell." The land office assessment was superficial. Sophia made a notation in her book. "Your soil has excellent potential with proper management. I'll include detailed recommendations in my report." Word spread through Ruby City faster than wildfire. The government woman actually knew what she was talking about. By the 3rd day, Sophia had a waiting list of property owners requesting assessments, but Coleman Vance's name remained conspicuously absent from that list. On the 4th morning, Sophia borrowed a horse from the livery and rode out toward the Vance ranch with Winters's reluctant directions. The land transformed as she traveled east, the struggling homesteads giving way to open range marked by sturdy fencing and cattle bearing a distinctive CV brand. The property spoke of prosperity and careful management, the grassland healthy and dotted with water sources that hadn't run dry despite the summer heat. The ranch house sat in a valley cradle, a substantial 2-story structure built from local timber with a wide porch that offered shade and a view of the surrounding hills. Outbuildings clustered nearby, a barn that could stable 24 horses, a bunkhouse, corrals, and what looked like a workshop. Everything showed signs of meticulous upkeep, the kind that came from pride rather than mere necessity. 3 ranch hands looked up from their work as Sophia approached, their conversation dying as they took in the sight of a woman riding alone onto the property. Before any of them could speak, the ranch house door opened and a man stepped onto the porch. Coleman Vance was not what Sophia had expected. Harold Winters's description had conjured images of a grizzled, hostile older rancher. But the man descending the porch steps couldn't have been more than 28 or 29. Tall and broad-shouldered with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of summer grass, he moved with the easy confidence of someone completely at home in his surroundings. His shirt sleeves were rolled to his elbows, and dust marked his clothes from obvious work. "You're trespassing." His voice carried clearly across the yard, not shouting but leaving no room for argument. Sophia dismounted, keeping her movements calm and deliberate. "Mr. Vance, my name is Sophia Greenfield. I'm conducting soil quality assessments for the Territorial Agricultural Development Project. I sent 3 letters requesting permission to survey your property, and I ignored all 3. Coleman stopped a dozen feet away, arms crossed over his chest. "I don't recall that being unclear." Your land represents over 40% of the arable territory in this county, Sophia said, meeting his gaze steadily. Excluding it from my assessment renders the entire project incomplete. Not my problem. Despite the dismissive words, Coleman's expression showed something more complex than simple hostility. His eyes tracked over her field clothes, the saddlebags bulging with equipment, the confident way she stood her ground. You work for the territorial government. I work for Cornell University's Agricultural Sciences Department. The territorial government contracted our services. Same thing. Government paper pushers who think they know better than people who actually work the land. Coleman's jaw tightened. My father built this ranch from nothing. Worked himself to death proving up claims, fighting drought, managing herds through brutal winters. Then some bureaucrat in an office decided our property lines were drawn wrong and seized 200 acres over tax assessment discrepancies. He died 6 months later, still fighting to get that land back. The pain beneath the anger was palpable, and Sophia's prepared arguments faltered. I'm sorry for your loss, truly, but I'm not here to take anything or dispute your holdings. I'm here to understand what makes your land productive so other farmers can learn from it. They can learn by doing what my father did. Work hard, pay attention, and figure it out. Coleman turned back toward the house. I'll ask you once to leave peacefully, Miss Greenfield, and if I refuse... The words left Sophia's mouth before she could consider the wisdom of challenging him. Coleman paused, looking back over his shoulder with an expression that might have been amusement under different circumstances. Then I'll have my men escort you to the property line, but I'd rather not. Something in that admission, the reluctance to actually force the issue, gave Sophia an opening. One day, she said quickly. Give me access for one day. I'll stay out of your way, conduct my surveys quietly, and you'll never see me again. You can even assign someone to watch me the entire time to ensure I'm not here to cause problems. Coleman turned fully, studying her with new intensity. Why does this matter so much to you? Because I spent 6 years convincing people that a woman could contribute to agricultural science, that my observations and analysis were worth consideration. Sophia felt the familiar fire kindle in her chest, the determination that had carried her through countless dismissals and condescending rejections. This project is my chance to prove that soil science can transform how we approach farming and ranching in the West, but only if I have complete data. Your land is the key piece. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the rustle of wind through grass. Coleman's ranch hands had stopped pretending not to listen, watching their boss with obvious curiosity about how he would handle this unusual standoff. Finally, Coleman exhaled slowly. Tomorrow, dawn to dusk, you'll work with me directly so I can see exactly what you're doing and where. The moment I decide you're overstepping, you leave. No arguments. Relief and triumph surged through Sophia in equal measure. Agreed. Thank you, Mr. Vance. Don't thank me yet. I still think this is government waste disguised as science. But something in his tone had softened slightly, as if her passion had resonated despite his resistance. Be here at sunrise. Wear practical clothes, and I hope you can ride better than most city women. Sophia allowed herself a small smile. I learned to ride before I learned long division, Mr. Vance. I'll see you at dawn. The ride back to Ruby City felt different, the landscape brightening with possibility. Sophia spent the evening preparing her equipment and reviewing her assessment protocols, determined to make every moment of her limited access count. She laid out her clothes, triple-checked her supplies, and barely slept despite her exhaustion. True dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold when Sophia arrived at the Vance ranch the next morning. Coleman was already waiting in the yard, 2 horses saddled and ready. He had cleaned up since yesterday, his shirt fresh and his hair still damp from washing, though he maintained the same guarded expression. "Coffee first," he said without preamble, gesturing toward the house. "Then we ride." The kitchen surprised Sophia with its unexpected warmth. Someone had added touches that spoke of careful attention: curtains in the windows, herbs growing in pots on the sill, a table worn smooth by years of use. Coleman poured coffee from a pot on the stove, handing her a cup without asking if she wanted any. "You live here alone?" Sophia asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "Since my father died. Had a housekeeper for a while, but she moved to Boise to be near her daughter." Coleman leaned against the counter, studying her over the rim of his cup. "So yes, alone except for the ranch hands in the bunkhouse." "It's a beautiful home. It's 4 walls and a roof." But his eyes softened slightly, betraying affection for the place despite his dismissive words. "My mother chose this valley, said it reminded her of Kentucky where she grew up. She died when I was 12. The vulnerability in that admission hung in the air between them. Sophia wrapped her hands around the warm cup, choosing her next words carefully. "You've kept it well. She would be proud." Coleman's expression shifted, surprise flickering across his features before he masked it with a noncommittal shrug. "Daylight's burning. If we're doing this, let's get started." They rode out as the sun cleared the mountains, Coleman leading them up into the northern pastures where the land rolled in gentle swells. Sophia explained her process as they went, describing how she would collect samples from different elevations and aspects to build a comprehensive picture of soil variation across his property. "Why does elevation matter?" Coleman asked, genuine curiosity breaking through his skepticism. "Water drainage, sun exposure, temperature fluctuations," Sophia replied, dismounting near a stand of cottonwoods. "Soil at the bottom of this hill receives runoff from above, accumulating different minerals and organic matter. The composition can vary dramatically within 100 yards. She pulled out her equipment, and Coleman watched as she worked with methodical precision, collecting samples at measured depths, testing texture and structure, making detailed notes about vegetation and water presence. Her movements showed practiced expertise, and Sophia was aware of his scrutiny, determined to demonstrate the rigor of her methods. "You really do know what you're doing," Coleman said after an hour, and it wasn't quite a question. "Did you think I was pretending?" Sophia looked up from labeling a sample vial, unable to keep the challenge from her voice. "I thought you were a bureaucrat with fancy equipment and theoretical knowledge." He dismounted and crouched beside where she worked, examining the soil profile she had exposed. "But you handle this land like you understand it, like you respect it." The compliment, unexpected and sincere, sent warmth through Sophia's chest. "The land tells us everything we need to know if we listen properly. Science is just the language we use to interpret what it's saying." Coleman reached out, letting earth run through his fingers with the unconscious familiarity of someone who had spent a lifetime working it. "My father used to say the land would provide if you paid attention to what it needed. Guess that's not so different from what you're saying." "It's not different at all," Sophia said quietly. "Your father was practicing soil science through observation and experience. I'm just using tools to measure what he understood instinctively." Something shifted in Coleman's demeanor, the hostility that had armored him since their first meeting beginning to crack. They rode deeper into his property, and he began pointing out features without prompting. The spring that never ran dry even in drought years, the south-facing slope where grass greened earliest, the section where his father had planted windbreak trees that now stood 30 feet tall. "Why haven't you expanded eastward?" Sophia asked as they paused on a ridge overlooking unclaimed territory. "That valley has obvious water access. Too many range wars already. Taking more land means more conflict with smaller operators, more fence cutting, more bad blood." Coleman's expression grew distant. "My father believed in working what you had well rather than grabbing everything in sight. I'm trying to honor that." They stopped for a brief lunch in the shade of an outcropping, sharing the food Coleman had packed. Sophia found herself studying him when she thought he wasn't looking, noticing details she had missed in her initial assessment. The calluses on his hands from ropes and tools, the laugh lines at the corners of his eyes despite his serious demeanor, the way he looked at his land with something approaching reverence. "Can I ask you something?" Coleman said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence that had developed. "Why agriculture? For a woman with your obvious intelligence, there must have been easier paths." Sophia considered the question, wondering how much to reveal. "I grew up on a farm in upstate New York. Small operation, my father and 2 brothers working land that barely sustained us. When I was 16, a bad decision about crop rotation ruined an entire season's wheat harvest. We almost lost everything." She paused, remembering the fear and helplessness of that year. A county extension agent came out, tested the soil, explained what had gone wrong and how to prevent it. Watching him work, seeing how knowledge could mean the difference between success and failure, I knew that was what I wanted to do. "Your family supported that." "My mother did, after a lot of convincing. My father thought I should focus on finding a husband." The old resentment flickered and faded. "But my mother made him see that understanding the land could help any family I might eventually have. She died before I finished university." "I'm sorry." Coleman's voice held genuine sympathy, the words of someone who understood profound loss. "She got to see me accepted to Cornell. That meant everything to her." Sophia met his eyes, finding unexpected understanding there. "We both lost parents who believed in us. Maybe that's why this work matters so much, proving they were right to have faith." Coleman held her gaze for a long moment, something passing between them that went beyond words. Then he stood, brushing dust from his pants with slightly more force than necessary. "We should keep moving. You want to see the creek bottomlands before the light fails." They spent the afternoon working their way through the lower elevations, and Sophia's excitement grew with each sample. Coleman's land showed remarkable diversity, the soil quality exceptional in ways that explained his ranch's prosperity. Rich loam in the valleys, well-drained slopes perfect for grazing, clay deposits that could support intensive cultivation with proper management. This section alone could sustain wheat production to supply half the territory, Sophia said, making rapid notes as the sun angled toward the western peaks. "The mineral composition is nearly perfect." "My father planted wheat here one season," Coleman said. "Best crop he ever grew, but he switched back to cattle the next year." "Why?" Said he was a rancher, not a farmer. New cattle understood them, didn't want to change his whole operation even if wheat paid better. Coleman smiled at the memory, the expression transforming his face. "Stubborn old man. Sounds like someone else I know," Sophia said before she could stop herself. Coleman's laugh surprised them both, genuine and unguarded. "Fair point, Miss Greenfield, fair point." The sun was setting when they returned to the ranch house. The day's work leaving Sophia physically tired but intellectually energized. Coleman helped her unload her equipment, his assistance easy and unstudied, as if somewhere during the day they had moved past adversarial positions to something approaching partnership. "You'll want these labeled and stored properly," he said, carrying sample cases into the house without asking. Sophia followed him inside, surprised to find herself in his home again. The evening light through the windows painted everything golden, and the space felt different now, less like enemy territory and more like a place she could imagine belonging. "Thank you for today," she said as Coleman set down the cases, "for giving me a chance when you had every reason not to." "I'm not sure I had much choice," Coleman replied, but his tone was warm. "You're remarkably persistent, Miss Greenfield." "Sophia." "If we're going to work together, you should call me Sophia." "Coleman," he replied, "though most people call me Cole." The use of given names felt significant, an acknowledgement of the connection that had formed during their day together. Sophia found herself reluctant to leave, inventing reasons to linger as she organized her samples and equipment. "I noticed sections I couldn't reach today," she said finally. "The high pastures near the eastern boundary and that section along the river where the willows grow." Coleman leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed but expression open in a way it hadn't been that morning. "Are you asking to come back, Sophia?" "I'm asking if you'll allow me to complete a thorough assessment, which would require several more days of access." She met his eyes steadily. "If you're willing." The silence stretched long enough that Sophia's heart began to sink, but then Coleman nodded slowly. "On one condition. You teach me your methods, show me how to do these tests myself so I can continue monitoring after you leave." The request surprised and touched her. "You want to learn soil science. I want to understand my land the way you do, the way my father tried to teach himself through observation. If science can enhance that understanding, I'm willing to learn." Coleman's expression grew serious. "And maybe if I understand what you're doing, I can help other ranchers see past their suspicion of government involvement." "I would love to teach you," Sophia said, meaning it completely. They arranged for her to return the following day and the day after and the one after that. What began as necessity transformed into something neither of them had anticipated. Each morning, Sophia rode out to the ranch as the sun rose, and each day she and Coleman worked side by side, covering his vast property with methodical thoroughness. But the work was only part of what drew her back. Between sample collections and measurements, they talked. Coleman told stories of building the ranch with his father, of brutal winters and summer droughts, of the satisfaction that came from working land you understood in your bones. Sophia shared her struggles in academia, the constant battle to be taken seriously, the joy of finally making discoveries that mattered. "Did you ever doubt yourself?" Coleman asked one afternoon as they rested beside a creek, cold water running over rocks worn smooth by time. "Wonder if fighting so hard was worth it." "Every single day," Sophia admitted. "Especially when professors told me I was wasting my time, that no one would hire a woman agricultural scientist, regardless of her qualifications. Yet here you are, contracted by the territorial government, doing exactly what they said was impossible." "Here I am," Sophia agreed. "Though I suspect the government hired Cornell's department without specifying they wanted male scientists only." Coleman grinned. "Their oversight our gain." The casual use of "our" made Sophia's breath catch. Somewhere during their days together, Cole had begun to feel like a partner rather than a reluctant subject. She found herself noticing things that had nothing to do with soil composition. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how gently he handled nervous horses, the unconscious care in everything he did. He was a man who had been hardened by loss and responsibility, but remained fundamentally kind, and Sophia felt herself drawn to that combination of strength and tenderness. For his part, Coleman found himself watching Sophia with growing fascination. Her passion for her work was infectious, the way she could read landscape like he read cattle movement or weather signs. But more than that, he admired her courage, the determination it must have taken to carve out space in a field that didn't want her. She was brilliant and stubborn and completely herself, unapologetic about taking up space in a world designed to make her small. One evening, after a particularly long day of surveying the northern sections, Coleman invited Sophia to stay for supper rather than ride back to Ruby City in the dark. She accepted with an ease that felt natural, helping him prepare a simple meal in the kitchen that no longer seemed quite so empty. "I can't remember the last time someone sat at this table," Coleman admitted as they ate. "Feels right, having you here." Sophia's cheeks warmed at the intimacy in his words. "I've enjoyed these days more than any research I've ever conducted." "Because of the soil quality?" Coleman asked, but his eyes said he knew better. "The soil is exceptional," Sophia replied carefully, "but that's not the only reason." Coleman set down his fork, reaching across the table to where Sophia's hand rested near her plate. His fingers brushed hers, tentative and questioning, and she turned her palm up to meet his touch. The calluses she had noticed that first day pressed against her softer skin, the difference in their hands telling the story of their different lives. "Sophia, I need to tell you something." Coleman's voice was rough with emotion. "When you first showed up, I saw you as everything I resented. Government interference, Eastern education, someone who couldn't possibly understand what it means to work this land. But I was wrong. You understand it better than almost anyone I've met, just in a different way. And somewhere in the past week, I stopped being able to imagine you leaving." The confession hung in the air between them, vulnerable and honest. Sophia's heart hammered against her ribs as she processed his words, the hope they kindled warring with practical concern she couldn't ignore. "I have to return to Cornell eventually," she said quietly. "To complete my research, submit my findings, defend my conclusions to people who are already looking for reasons to dismiss them." "I know." Coleman's thumb traced circles on her palm. "I'm not asking you to give up your work, Sophia. God knows I wouldn't respect you as much if you could abandon something you fought so hard for. I'm just saying that these days with you have been the best I've had since my father died. You make this place feel alive again." Sophia stood, moving around the table to where Coleman sat. He looked up at her with those green eyes that had become so dear, and she cupped his face in her hands, feeling the slight rasp of stubble against her palms. "I don't want to leave," she whispered. "That terrifies me because I've always known exactly what I wanted, where I was going. But being here with you, it's changed something fundamental." Coleman stood, his hands settling on her waist with careful reverence. "Then maybe we figure out a way forward together. Maybe there's room in your life for both the work you love and whatever this is between us. Is that what you want?" "For me to come back after I finish my research obligations." "I want you to stay tonight," Coleman said, his voice low and intense. "Tomorrow, I want to wake up and show you the sunrise from the eastern ridge. Next week, I want to hear more about your plans for improving crop rotation. Next month, next year, I want to build something with you that honors both our dreams. But I'll start with tonight and see where it leads." Sophia kissed him then, closing the distance between them with a certainty that felt like coming home. Coleman responded with a passion tempered by tenderness, his arms wrapping around her as if she were something precious he couldn't quite believe he was allowed to hold. The kiss deepened, and Sophia felt herself melting into his embrace, all the loneliness and struggle of the past years giving way to the simple rightness of being wanted exactly as she was. They parted slowly, foreheads resting together as they caught their breath. Coleman's hands trembled slightly where they cradled her face, and Sophia realized he was as overwhelmed as she was by the intensity of feeling between them. "Stay," he said again, and this time it wasn't a question. "Yes," Sophia replied. "Yes, I'll stay." That night marked a turning point, though they both knew challenges remained. Sophia did have obligations back east, research to complete, and a position to maintain. But lying in Coleman's arms in the darkness of his bedroom, listening to his steady heartbeat beneath her ear, she began to imagine possibilities she had never allowed herself to consider before. A life that included both her professional ambitions and the kind of love she had witnessed in her parents' marriage before her mother's death. The next morning, they rode out together as the sun painted the mountains pink and gold, and Coleman showed Sophia the view he had promised. The entire valley spread below them, his ranch a patchwork of pasture and creek bottom, everything he had worked to build and preserve visible in the clear morning light. "I used to come up here when things felt overwhelming," Coleman said, his arm around Sophia's waist as they stood looking out over the land. "Reminded me what I was working for, why it mattered." "It's beautiful," Sophia said simply, inadequate words for the profound peace of the scene before them. "It could be ours," Coleman said quietly. "If you wanted, not just the land but the life we could build on it. Your research, my ranching, figuring out together how to make both work." Sophia turned to face him, seeing the vulnerability in his expression, the risk he was taking by offering her everything he had. "Are you asking me to marry you, Cole Vance?" "Not yet," he said, a smile tugging at his lips despite the seriousness of the moment. "We've known each other barely 2 weeks, and I'm not fool enough to think that's enough time to make a lifetime decision. But I'm asking if you can imagine it, if the life I'm describing sounds like something you might want, given time." "I can imagine it," Sophia admitted. "More clearly than I should be able to after such a short time. But Cole, my work matters to me. I can't become someone who just supports your dreams while abandoning my own. I would never ask you to." Coleman's hands framed her face with infinite gentleness. "Your work is part of who you are, and who you are is exactly who I'm falling in love with. We'll figure out how to make it work, Sophia. Maybe you do field research from here. Maybe you split time between Ruby City and Cornell. Maybe something neither of us has thought of yet. But I believe there's a way forward that honors both our callings." The word love hung in the air between them, acknowledged but not quite fully spoken. Sophia rose on her toes, kissing him with all the hope and fear and possibility swirling through her heart. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered against his lips. "It's terrifying and wonderful and completely unexpected." They spent the rest of the morning on that ridge, talking through practicalities and possibilities with the same methodical approach Sophia brought to her research. Coleman revealed that his ranch was profitable enough to support both of them comfortably, that he had been setting aside money for years with no particular goal beyond security. Sophia explained her contract with Cornell, the expectations and limitations, the fact that her current project gave her 6 months of field research time before she needed to return for a semester of teaching. 6 months, Coleman repeated. "That's enough time to know for certain. To make plans that aren't just beautiful dreams." "Yes," Sophia agreed. 6 months to see if what we feel now has roots deep enough to sustain a lifetime." They returned to the ranch house hand in hand, and Sophia felt the future opening before her in ways she had never anticipated. The next weeks fell into a pattern that felt both exciting and comfortable. She continued her soil assessments, expanding beyond Coleman's property to the surrounding homesteads and ranches with his introduction smoothing the way. Word of her expertise had spread, and her association with the formerly hostile Cole Vance gave her credibility that her Cornell credentials alone might never have achieved. But each evening she returned to the ranch, to shared meals and conversations that ranged from soil chemistry to childhood memories to dreams they were beginning to weave together. Coleman taught her to rope cattle, laughing as she missed repeatedly before finally catching a young steer on her 20th attempt. Sophia showed him how to use her testing equipment, patient as he learned to measure pH levels and assess mineral content. "You're a good teacher," Coleman said one afternoon as they processed samples together in the ranch house kitchen, which had been transformed into a makeshift laboratory. "You're a good student," Sophia replied. "Not everyone has the patience for this kind of detailed work. I'm motivated." Coleman looked up from the sample he was examining, his eyes warm. "Learning what you know means I can help you when you're here and continue the work when you're not. Makes the time apart more bearable." The acknowledgement that there would be time apart, that their future included separation as well as togetherness, was bittersweet but necessary. Sophia appreciated that Coleman didn't pretend otherwise, that he accepted the complexity of what they were building. One evening, about 5 weeks into Sophia's stay in Ruby City, Coleman asked her to attend the community dance being held in the town hall. It would be their first public appearance as a couple, a statement to the community about the seriousness of their relationship. "People will talk," Sophia warned as she prepared for the event in her boarding house room. "About us, about how quickly this has developed." "Let them talk," Coleman said, waiting to escort her the short distance to the hall. "I spent 3 years living in the shadow of my father's death, avoiding connection because it hurt less than risking more loss. You've reminded me that living means being willing to take risks, to be seen, to claim what matters to you." The dance was already in full swing when they arrived, fiddle music spilling out into the street along with lamplight and laughter. Heads turned as Coleman and Sophia entered together, his hand at the small of her back in a gesture both protective and proud. Sophia felt the weight of curious stares but held her head high, refusing to be diminished by speculation. Harold Winters approached immediately, surprise and calculation warring on his features. "Miss Greenfield, Mr. Vance. I heard you two had been working together, but I didn't realize you had become so well acquainted." "Sophia has been conducting soil assessments on my property," Coleman said evenly. "And yes, we've become well acquainted in the process. Is that a problem, Winters?" "No problem at all," Winters said quickly, though his expression suggested otherwise. "Just unexpected given your previous stance on government representatives. I learned to distinguish between bureaucratic overreach and legitimate scientific inquiry," Coleman replied. "Sophia's work is valuable, and I was wrong to dismiss it out of hand." The conversation was interrupted by the caller announcing the next dance, and Coleman turned to Sophia with a slight bow. "May I have this dance?" "You may," Sophia replied, taking his offered hand. They moved onto the floor together, and Coleman proved to be a surprisingly graceful dancer despite his rancher's build. He guided Sophia through the steps with confident ease, and she found herself relaxing into the movement, aware of nothing beyond the music and the man holding her. "You dance well," she said as they turned through a particularly complex pattern. "My mother insisted I learn," Coleman replied. "Said a man needed to be comfortable in a ballroom as well as on a ranch. I thought it was foolish until just now. And now I'm grateful I can hold you like this without stepping on your feet." Sophia laughed, the sound bright and free, drawing smiles from other dancers nearby. For the first time since arriving in Ruby City, she felt completely at ease, not the government representative or the Eastern scientist, but simply a woman dancing with a man she loved. As the evening progressed, They were approached by various community members with reactions ranging from warm congratulations to thinly veiled disapproval. The farmers Sophia had helped with soil assessments expressed genuine pleasure at seeing her happy. Some of the older ranchers, friends of Coleman's father, questioned whether he was moving too quickly, whether this Eastern woman could truly adapt to frontier life. Coleman fielded each comment with steady courtesy, never defensive but making clear that his relationship with Sophia was not open for debate. "My father taught me to trust my own judgment about my land and my life," he said to one particularly persistent questioner. "I'm applying that lesson now." Late in the evening, as the crowd began to thin and the musicians played slower songs, Coleman led Sophia outside into the cool night air. They walked a short distance from the hall, finding a quiet spot where they could see stars scattered across the sky like salt spilled on dark cloth. "Thank you for tonight," Sophia said, leaning into Coleman's side as his arm circled her shoulders, "for being willing to face the gossip and speculation." "They'll talk regardless of what we do," Coleman replied. "Might as well give them something real to discuss." "And honestly, Sophia, I wanted to show you off. Wanted everyone to know that somehow, impossibly, you chose me." "You say that as if you're not an extraordinary man," Sophia said, turning to face him. "Cole, you're intelligent, hardworking, principled, and kind. You honor your father's legacy while making your own path. You are willing to change your mind when presented with new information. Those are rare qualities." Coleman kissed her then, slow and deep under the vast Idaho sky. When they finally parted, his eyes shone with emotion. "Marry me, Sophia." "I know I said I wouldn't ask yet, that we needed more time, but I'm absolutely certain. You're what's been missing from my life, and I don't want to waste another day not building our future together." Sophia's heart soared even as her practical mind raised immediate objections. "Cole, I still have 4 months left on my field research. After that, I'm contracted to teach at Cornell for the spring semester. That's at least 9 months before I could permanently relocate. Then we'll have a long engagement," Coleman said simply. "You'll finish your research, fulfill your teaching obligation, and I'll use that time to prepare. We can add rooms to the ranch house, set up a proper laboratory for your work, make plans for how you'll conduct research from here. When you come back next summer, we'll marry and start our life together properly." The vision he painted was so vivid Sophia could almost see it. A life divided between fieldwork and teaching, between the ranch and occasional trips east, between the work she loved and the man she loved. It would be complicated and require compromise from both of them, but standing there under the stars with Coleman's hope-filled eyes on her face, it felt not just possible but inevitable. "Yes," she said, the word emerging as something between a laugh and a sob. "Yes, I'll marry you, Cole Vance." The kiss that followed was interrupted by cheers from the dance hall doorway, where apparently their absence had been noticed, and their embrace observed. Coleman laughed, pulling Sophia close against his side as they turned to face a small crowd of well-wishers who had spilled out to congratulate them. The next morning, hungover from celebration and dizzy with happiness, Sophia examined her left hand where a simple gold band now circled her ring finger. Coleman had produced it at dawn, explaining it had been his mother's, and asking if Sophia would wear it as a promise until he could afford something finer. "It's perfect," she had told him, and meant it. The ring was warm from his pocket, worn smooth by years of his mother's wearing, and it fit as if made for her hand. They spent the next weeks in a flurry of practical planning mixed with the heady joy of new engagement. Sophia completed her soil assessments with renewed purpose, knowing her findings would help shape agricultural development in a place she would call home. She wrote long letters to her department head at Cornell, explaining her situation and proposing a modified schedule that would allow her to conduct field research from Idaho while fulfilling teaching obligations through intensive semester blocks. To her surprise and relief, the department proved supportive. Her work in Idaho Territory was already generating interest back east, her detailed reports and innovative assessment methods drawing praise from colleagues who had previously been skeptical of her abilities. The department head wrote back proposing she become Cornell's permanent Western field researcher, a position that would allow her to be based in Idaho while submitting regular reports and returning each spring for a concentrated teaching period. "It's perfect," Sophia said, reading the letter aloud to Coleman as they sat on the ranch house porch watching sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. "They're creating a position specifically for me, acknowledging that field research requires extended time in location." "Your work changed minds," Coleman said, pride evident in his voice. "Just like you changed mine." As Sophia's 6-month research period drew to a close, they made the most of their remaining time together. Coleman took her to his favorite places on the ranch, sharing stories and creating new memories they could hold during the coming separation. Sophia documented everything in her notebooks, professional observations intermingling with personal reflections about the land she would return to as both scientist and wife. The night before Sophia was scheduled to depart for New York, they sat together in the ranch house parlor, fire crackling in the hearth against autumn's first chill. Coleman held her close, his chin resting on top of her head, both of them quiet with the weight of impending goodbye. 9 months, Coleman said finally. 270 days, give or take. I've already started counting. "I'll write every week," Sophia promised. "Long letters about my research and what I'm teaching and how much I miss you. And I'll write back about the ranch, the weather, whatever book I'm struggling through to keep my mind occupied." Coleman's arms tightened around her. "This isn't goodbye forever, just goodbye for now." "Goodbye for now," Sophia echoed, turning to kiss him with all the love and longing in her heart. The stagecoach departure the next morning was witnessed by half of Ruby City, the community turning out to see off the woman who had arrived as a stranger and become one of their own. Coleman held Sophia until the last possible moment, then helped her into the coach with hands that shook slightly despite his controlled expression. "Come back to me," he said through the window, his eyes fierce with love and determination. "I will," Sophia promised. "I swear it, Cole. This is my home now. You're my home. I'm just going away for a little while to finish what I started." The coach pulled away in a cloud of dust, and Sophia watched through the rear window as Coleman stood in the street, one hand raised in farewell, until distance and terrain took him from view. Only then did she allow tears to fall, mourning the separation even as she held tight to the promise of return. The 9 months that followed tested both of them in ways they hadn't anticipated. Sophia threw herself into teaching with renewed energy, drawing on her Idaho experiences to make her lectures vivid and practical. Her students responded to her passion, and even skeptical colleagues had to acknowledge the value of her field research when she presented her findings at the winter faculty symposium. But nights were hard, the boarding house room near campus cold and lonely compared to Coleman's ranch house. She wrote letters by lamplight, filling pages with observations about eastern soil composition and detailed questions about ranch operations, anything to maintain the connection across 2,000 miles of distance. Coleman's letters arrived weekly like clockwork, thick envelopes filled with news about cattle prices and weather patterns and the progress he was making on expanding the ranch house. He wrote about missing her with an eloquence that surprised her, his words on paper revealing depths of feeling he sometimes struggled to express in person. I walked out to the ridge where we watched sunrise that first morning together. One letter read, "The view is still beautiful, but it feels incomplete without you beside me. I'm learning that places we've shared are haunted by your absence, which makes me both treasure the memories and long desperately for your return." Sophia carried his letters in her satchel, reading and rereading them between classes and during lonely evenings. Her colleagues noticed the change in her, the way she glowed when mail arrived from Idaho, and gradually the story of her engagement spread through the department. "I'm happy for you," her faculty mentor said during a January meeting, "though I confess I worried we might lose you entirely to domestic life." "You're not losing me," Sophia assured her. "I'm expanding my field of influence, literally. The work I can do in Idaho Territory will benefit Cornell's reputation and advance our understanding of Western agricultural conditions. And having a partner who understands and supports my work makes me more effective, not less." Spring arrived slowly in New York, snowmelt revealing mud and the first tentative green shoots. Sophia fulfilled her teaching obligations with one eye on the calendar, counting down days until she could return to Idaho. Coleman's letters grew more frequent and excited as their reunion approached, filled with details about preparations he was making. "The new rooms are finished," he wrote in April. "I've set aside the southeast corner as your laboratory, with large windows for natural light and shelving for your equipment and samples. I probably got some details wrong since I'm no scientist, but I hope it will serve your purposes. If not, we'll modify it together until it's exactly what you need." The thoughtfulness of him creating dedicated space for her work moved Sophia to tears. She wrote back describing her plans for the laboratory setup, already imagining herself working there with mountain views through the windows and Coleman nearby. Finally, gloriously, the semester ended, and Sophia was free to return west. The journey that had felt like adventure 9 months earlier now felt like the painful distance between her and home. She endured the train and stage travel with barely contained impatience, willing the miles to pass faster. Ruby City appeared on the horizon on a brilliant June morning, the mountains standing clear and sharp against cloudless sky. Sophia's heart hammered as the stage entered town, and then she saw him. Coleman waited outside the telegraph office exactly where they had first met, looking somehow both familiar and new after their months apart. He had gotten a haircut recently, and his clothes were Sunday best rather than work-worn, but his eyes held the same love and longing she felt mirrored in her own heart. The stage hadn't even fully stopped before Sophia was climbing down, abandoning propriety in her desperate need to reach him. Coleman met her halfway, sweeping her into his arms with a force that lifted her feet off the ground. They held each other in the middle of the street, oblivious to the watching crowd, making up for 9 months of separation with the fierce intensity of their embrace. "You're here," Coleman said against her hair, his voice rough with emotion. "You're really here." "I'm home," Sophia replied, and the rightness of those words settled into her bones like truth. They were married 3 days later in a simple ceremony at Ruby City's small church, with half the county in attendance. Sophia wore a dress she had brought from New York, cream silk that her mother would have loved, and carried wildflowers Coleman had picked that morning from the ranch's high meadows. Coleman wore a dark suit that emphasized his height and the breadth of his shoulders, but what Sophia would remember most was the look in his eyes as she walked down the aisle toward him. Pure joy mixed with wonder as if he couldn't quite believe his luck. Harold Winters served as official witness, his earlier skepticism transformed into genuine goodwill. "I'll admit I had doubts," he said at the small reception afterward. "But seeing you two together, the way you balance each other, I'm convinced this is exactly right." The ranch hands from Coleman's property had cleaned up and come to town for the celebration, slightly awkward in their formal clothes but clearly pleased for their boss. "He's been impossible to live with these past months," one of them confided to Sophia, "moping around like a kicked dog. Good to have you back to put him right." As evening approached, Coleman and Sophia slipped away from the festivities, riding out to the ranch in the golden light of approaching sunset. The house looked different than Sophia remembered. Fresh paint on the trim and new curtains in the windows announcing someone had been working hard to make it welcoming. Coleman helped her dismount in the ranch yard, then swept her up in his arms before she could protest. "Carrying you over the threshold," he explained, his grin infectious. "Some traditions are worth keeping." Inside, the house had been transformed. Fresh flowers stood in vases on every surface, and someone had prepared a wedding supper that waited in the kitchen. But what took Sophia's breath was the new wing Coleman had added, the doorway opening onto her promised laboratory. The space was perfect, everything she could have hoped for and more. Shelving lined the walls, built to accommodate her equipment and sample storage. The large south-facing windows flooded the room with light, and a sturdy work table dominated the center. A smaller desk sat in the corner with a comfortable chair, clearly meant for writing reports and analyzing data. "Cole, it's wonderful," Sophia breathed, running her hand along the smooth wood of the work table. "You built this, all of it, with help from the ranch hands," Coleman admitted. "But I designed it based on your letters describing what you needed. If anything's wrong, we can modify it." Sophia turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Nothing's wrong. It's absolutely perfect. You built me a space to do the work I love in the home we'll share. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever done for me." They came together in the middle of the laboratory, kissing with the pent-up longing of 9 months apart and the joy of finally beginning their married life. Later, much later, they would explore the rest of the house additions and eat the wedding supper and talk late into the night. But for that moment, they simply held each other in the space Coleman had created for Sophia's work, a physical representation of his commitment to honoring both her dreams and their love. The months that followed established the rhythm of their married life. Sophia set up her laboratory and resumed her field research, expanding her soil quality assessments to a wider territory. Coleman ran the ranch with the same careful attention he had always applied, but now he incorporated Sophia's scientific insights into his land management decisions. They made a formidable team. Sophia's soil analysis identified the best locations for expanding hay production, and Coleman's practical ranching knowledge helped her understand how theoretical improvements would work in practice. They hosted visits from neighboring ranchers and farmers, Sophia sharing her findings and teaching basic soil testing methods, while Coleman demonstrated the improvements they had implemented. "You're becoming quite the teacher," Sophia observed one evening after a particularly successful demonstration day. "Half those men were taking notes." "I learned from the best," Coleman replied, pulling her close on the porch swing they had installed to watch sunsets together. "Besides, I want other people to succeed like we have. Feels like honoring my father's memory, helping the community thrive." Sophia rested her head on his shoulder, contentment settling over her like a warm blanket. "Your father would be proud of what you've built, Cole. What we're building together." That first year of marriage brought challenges along with joys. Sophia's first return trip to Cornell for spring teaching was harder than either of them anticipated. the separation painful despite being temporary and expected. Coleman struggled with her absence, the house feeling empty and quiet without her presence. Sophia found herself distracted during lectures, homesick for Idaho in a way she had never been homesick for New York, but they made it work through determination and commitment. Sophia compressed her teaching into an intensive 8-week session, returning to Idaho for the summer field research season. Coleman used her absence to focus on ranch improvements and planning, making their reunions that much sweeter for the time apart. The second spring brought unexpected news. Sophia had been feeling unwell for several weeks, a persistent nausea that finally sent her to the doctor in Ruby City. She returned to the ranch that afternoon in a daze, clutching the doctor's confirmation of what she had already begun to suspect. Coleman was working in the barn when she found him, and the expression on her face brought him to her side immediately. "What's wrong? Are you ill?" "Not ill," Sophia said, her voice shaking with a mixture of excitement and terror. "Pregnant. We're going to have a baby, Cole." The shock on his face transformed rapidly into joy so pure it brought fresh tears to Sophia's eyes. Coleman lifted her carefully, spinning her around with a whoop of delight that startled the horses. "A baby! We're having a baby!" The pregnancy forced modifications to their plans. Sophia couldn't travel to Cornell for spring teaching, so she arranged to submit written materials and have a colleague deliver her lectures. She continued her field research locally through the summer, though Coleman became increasingly protective as her pregnancy progressed, insisting she avoid strenuous activities. "I'm pregnant, not fragile," Sophia protested when he tried to prevent her from collecting samples on a particularly rocky hillside. "You're carrying our child," Coleman replied firmly, "and I'm not taking any chances with either of your safety. Let me help with the physical work, and you can supervise and analyze." They compromised, Coleman doing the heavy lifting and sample collection under Sophia's direction. Working together brought new intimacy to their partnership, and Sophia found herself falling in love with her husband all over again, as she watched him carefully execute her instructions with the same focus he brought to everything he cared about. Their son was born in February during a late winter storm, his arrival heralded by winds that howled around the ranch house, while Sophia labored with determined focus. The doctor from Ruby City made it through the snow just in time, and Coleman held Sophia's hand through the entire ordeal, his face white with worry but his presence steadying. When the doctor finally placed their son in Sophia's arms, tiny and red-faced and perfect, Coleman wept openly. "He's beautiful," he said, his voice breaking. "He's absolutely beautiful, Sophia." They named him Thomas after Sophia's father, with Coleman's father's name as a middle name. Little Thomas proved to be a healthy, vocal baby who kept them both busy and sleep-deprived through his first months. Sophia adapted her work schedule around nursing and baby care, often conducting analysis with Thomas sleeping in a basket beside her laboratory work table. "Is this what you imagined?" Coleman asked one evening as they sat together watching their son sleep, tiny fists curled beside his head. "When you came to Idaho to test soil, did you imagine you'd end up here?" "Never," Sophia admitted. "I thought I'd conduct my assessments, submit my reports, and move on to the next project. I didn't imagine falling in love with a stubborn rancher or building a life that includes both my work and a family." "You regret it? The career you might have had if you'd stayed focused solely on research?" Sophia considered the question seriously before answering. "I have the career I want, just shaped differently than I expected. My work matters, maybe more than it would have if I'd stayed in an academic ivory tower. I'm making practical differences in how people farm and ranch across the territory." And I have you and Thomas, which makes everything richer and more meaningful. So no, I don't regret this path." Coleman kissed her temple, his arm around her shoulders. "Good, because I can't imagine my life without you in it. You've transformed everything, Sophia. This ranch, this community, me especially." As Thomas grew from infant to active toddler, the ranch house filled with noise and energy it had never known before. Sophia hired a young woman from Ruby City to help with childcare so she could continue her research. And Coleman proved to be a devoted father, often found playing with Thomas or teaching him about animals and growing things. The territorial government expanded its contract with Cornell based on the success of Sophia's work, funding ongoing soil quality monitoring and agricultural development recommendations. Sophia's reputation grew throughout Idaho Territory and beyond, other western states requesting similar assessments. She began training other researchers in her methods, creating a network of soil scientists who could conduct coordinated studies across the frontier. Coleman expanded the ranch operations based on Sophia's soil findings, adding wheat production in areas she identified as ideal for cultivation. The diversity of income from both cattle and crops made the ranch more resilient and profitable than ever. He became a vocal advocate for scientific land management, speaking at cattlemen's associations and farmers' meetings about the benefits of understanding soil composition. Their partnership became a model for the community, proof that marriage could enhance rather than limit both partners' ambitions. Young women in Ruby City pointed to Sophia as evidence they could pursue education and careers while also building families. Progressive ranchers consulted both Vance spouses, seeking Coleman's practical expertise and Sophia's scientific analysis in equal measure. 3 years after Thomas's birth, Sophia gave birth to a daughter they named Caroline, after Coleman's mother. Caroline proved to be as calm and observant as Thomas was energetic, content to sit for long periods examining everything with intense focus. "She has your eyes," Coleman said, cradling his daughter with the same wonder he had shown holding Thomas for the first time. "And I suspect she got your brain too. Look how carefully she's studying everything." "It's too early to tell what she got besides your stubbornness," Sophia replied, but she smiled as she watched father and daughter together. The ranch house continued to evolve with their growing family. Coleman added more rooms, creating separate bedrooms for the children and a larger kitchen that could accommodate family meals and the occasional gatherings they hosted for neighboring families. The laboratory remained Sophia's sanctuary, but she also created a playroom where Thomas and Caroline could entertain themselves while she worked nearby. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Coleman surprised Sophia with a trip to the Ridge, where he had first asked her to imagine a future together. They rode out at dawn, leaving the children with their hired help, and watched the sun rise over land they had learned together, worked together, built a life upon together. "You remember what you said when I asked if you could imagine this?" Coleman asked as pink light flooded the valley below. "I said I could imagine it more clearly than I should after such a short time," Sophia replied, leaning into his warmth. "I was terrified and hopeful in equal measure. And now I can't imagine anything else. This land, this life, you and our children, my work, everything fits together in ways I never knew were possible." Sophia turned to face him, framing his beloved face with her hands. "You proved to me that love and ambition aren't opposing forces, Cole. That I could have both if I was brave enough to reach for them. You made me believe in possibility again," Coleman replied, his voice thick with emotion. "After my father died, I thought the best parts of my life were behind me. but you showed me that loss doesn't mean closing yourself off from future joy. That letting someone in, building something together, that's what makes all the work worthwhile." They kissed as the sun cleared the mountains. Two people who had started as adversaries and become partners in every sense of the word. The land spread below them, fertile and productive, carefully tended by science and love in equal measure. The years continued to unfold with the steady rhythm of seasons and growth. Sophia's research expanded to include water conservation and sustainable grazing practices, her work influencing territorial policy and helping countless farmers and ranchers improve their operations. She published papers that were read throughout the West and back east, becoming one of the most respected voices in frontier agriculture. Coleman became a territorial representative, elected by neighbors who respected his integrity and knowledge. He pushed for legislation supporting education and scientific land management, using his platform to advocate for the kind of progressive policies that had transformed his own ranch's success. Thomas grew into a thoughtful boy who loved both his mother's scientific approach and his father's hands-on ranching, often found conducting his own soil experiments or helping Coleman with cattle. Caroline proved to be a natural teacher, explaining complicated concepts to other children with patience beyond her years. When Thomas was 10 and Caroline 7, Sophia and Coleman welcomed twin boys they named James and William. The arrival of twins at once shocked and delighted the family, the ranch house filling with even more noise and activity. 4 children, Coleman said, holding a twin in each arm while Sophia recovered from the difficult delivery. "We're outnumbered now, Sophia." "We always were," she replied with a tired laugh. "Children have a way of overwhelming even the best laid plans, but I wouldn't change a thing." The twins proved to be a handful, energetic and mischievous in ways their older siblings had never been. But the chaos they brought was tempered by the help of Thomas and Caroline, who took their roles as older siblings seriously. The ranch became a lively, loving place filled with children's laughter and the satisfaction of work that mattered. As their children grew, Sophia and Coleman made sure to involve them in both ranch work and scientific inquiry. Family dinners often featured debates about soil composition or cattle breeding techniques, the children learning to think critically and question assumptions. Sophia taught all of them her research methods, while Coleman ensured they understood the practical realities of working the land. "You're raising the next generation of scientists and ranchers," Harold Winters observed during a visit when Thomas was 15. The boy was presenting his own research project on crop rotation optimization, showing poise and knowledge that impressed everyone present. "We're raising people who understand that different ways of knowing are all valuable," Sophia corrected. "Science and experience, theory and practice, they all have roles to play in building a good life and serving a community." On their 10th anniversary, with Thomas approaching adulthood and the twins keeping everyone busy, Coleman and Sophia took a rare evening alone on their porch. The ranch spread before them in the twilight, productive fields and healthy cattle visible even in the fading light. In the distance, they could hear their children playing, their voices carrying in the still air. "When I first saw you step off that stagecoach, dusty and determined, clutching your satchel like it contained the secrets of the universe, I never imagined this," Coleman said, his arm around Sophia's shoulders in the familiar gesture that had become their default position. "I thought you were an irritation I'd have to tolerate briefly before you disappeared back east. And I thought you were an obstacle I'd have to overcome," Sophia replied, smiling at the memory of their first hostile encounter. a stubborn rancher too set in his ways to recognize the value of scientific progress. "We were both wrong and both right," Coleman observed. "I was stubborn, you were determined, and somehow those qualities worked together instead of against each other." "Because we were willing to listen," Sophia said. "You gave me a chance to prove my methods had value, and I respected your knowledge even when our approaches differed. That willingness to learn from each other made all the difference." They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. From inside the house came the sounds of their children preparing for bed, a routine that brought structure to busy days. The laboratory windows glowed with lamplight where Thomas was likely still working on his latest project, inheriting his mother's tendency toward late-night research. "You ever miss it?" Coleman asked quietly. "The life you might have had. Full-time academic work, no competing obligations, all your time devoted to research." Sophia considered the question, not answering immediately. It was something she asked herself occasionally, usually when struggling to balance multiple demands or when exhaustion made everything feel overwhelming. But the answer was always the same. "I miss the simplicity sometimes," she admitted. "There's something appealing about having a single focus, but I don't miss the loneliness, the feeling that my work existed in isolation from real life. Here, my research has immediate application. I see farmers succeeding because of methods I developed, watch the land improving because of practices we've pioneered together. And I have you and our children, this whole rich life that makes the work more meaningful, not less. Even when the twins destroy your samples." Coleman asked, referring to an incident the previous week when James and William had knocked over carefully organized soil collections while roughhousing. "Even then," Sophia confirmed, laughing. "Though I'll admit, I was less philosophical about it in the moment." Coleman pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I love you, Sophia Vance, for your brilliant mind and passionate heart, for being an amazing mother and groundbreaking scientist, for choosing this life with me when you could have had anything you wanted." "I do have what I want," Sophia replied, turning to kiss him properly. "Everything I want. This land, this family, work that matters, and you, always you, Cole. You're the foundation everything else is built on." The years continued their steady march forward. Thomas left for university back east at 18, determined to study both agriculture and engineering so he could return and modernize ranch operations. Caroline followed 2 years later, pursuing teaching with the same focus Sophia brought to research. The twins grew from mischievous boys into responsible young men who worked the ranch alongside their father with increasing skill. Sophia's work expanded beyond Idaho Territory as her reputation grew. She consulted on major agricultural projects across the West, her methods becoming standard practice in frontier soil assessment. But she always returned to the ranch, to the laboratory Coleman had built her, and the land they had learned together. Coleman served multiple terms as territorial representative, helping shepherd Idaho toward eventual statehood. His legislation supporting agricultural education and sustainable land management practices became model policy adopted by other territories. But his greatest pride remained the ranch, and the family he and Sophia had built together. On their 20th anniversary, with Thomas married and running his own operation on land they had helped him acquire, Caroline teaching in Boise, and the twins preparing to inherit the original ranch, Sophia and Coleman rode out to their ridge one final time as a couple alone. Their hair showed silver now, and the ride up was harder than it had been decades before, but the view remained as spectacular as ever. 20 years, Coleman said, his arm around Sophia as they looked out over the valley transformed by their combined efforts. Sometimes it feels like yesterday you stepped off that stage, and sometimes it feels like you've been part of this land forever. Both are true, Sophia replied, leaning into his familiar warmth. I became part of this place the moment I fell in love with you, even though I didn't recognize it immediately. The land and you are inseparable in my mind now. We did good work here, Coleman observed, gesturing toward the prosperous valley below. Not just the ranch, but everything we influenced through your research and my advocacy. Look at how the whole region has transformed. It was true. The Idaho Territory they had helped shape bore little resemblance to the rough frontier Sophia had first encountered. Farming and ranching operations throughout the region employed scientific land management practices. Schools taught agricultural science alongside traditional subjects. The community had grown and prospered, building on the foundation of knowledge and careful stewardship. Our children will carry it forward, Sophia said, thinking of Thomas's innovative approaches and Caroline's dedication to educating the next generation. They understand both the science and the soul of this work. That's the best legacy we could leave. Along with a few grandchildren, Coleman added with a grin, referring to Thomas's 2 sons and Caroline's infant daughter. Along with that, Sophia agreed, smiling. They stayed on the ridge until sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, the same colors that had greeted them on so many mornings and evenings throughout their years together. When they finally rode down as darkness gathered, it was with the satisfaction of people who had built something lasting and true. The ranch house welcomed them home with lamplight, and the smells of dinner prepared by the housekeeper they had finally hired to ease Sophia's domestic burden. The twins were out checking on a pregnant cow, but they would return soon for the family meal that remained a sacred tradition, no matter how busy everyone became. In the laboratory, Sophia's current research materials lay organized and ready for tomorrow's work. In the barn, Coleman's carefully bred cattle represented generations of selective improvement. Throughout the house, photographs documented their growing family and the land they had devoted their lives to understanding and nurturing. That night, lying in bed with Coleman's arm around her in the darkness that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat, Sophia reflected on the unexpected path her life had taken. She had come to test soil quality, driven by scientific curiosity and professional ambition. She had found all that and so much more: love that enhanced rather than limited her, partnership that strengthened both parties, and a life rich with meaning and connection. "Cole," she said softly into the darkness, "are you still awake?" "Always for you," he replied, his voice drowsy but attentive. "What's on your mind?" "Just thinking about that first day when you told me I was trespassing. If someone had told me then that I'd spend the rest of my life on this ranch, married to the stubborn rancher who wanted nothing to do with government scientists, I would have thought they were crazy." Coleman's laugh rumbled through his chest where Sophia's head rested. "And if someone had told me I'd marry a scientist and spend my evenings discussing soil pH levels, I would have said the same. But here we are, and I wouldn't change a single thing. Not even the time the twins released all my carefully captured soil samples to set them free." "Well, maybe that one thing," Coleman conceded. "But everything else, absolutely perfect." They drifted into sleep together, partners in every sense of the word, their lives intertwined as deeply as the roots of the grasses that held the soil they had studied and worked together. Outside, the Idaho night settled over the land they loved, while inside, the ranch house stood as testament to what could be built when science and experience, love and respect, ambition and commitment all found common ground. Years later, when Sophia was 72 and Coleman 76, they would sit together on the porch they had shared for 50 years and watch their grandchildren and great-grandchildren play in the yard where Sophia had first dismounted to ask permission for her soil surveys. The ranch remained in family hands, but it had evolved into something more than Coleman's father could have imagined: a working demonstration of sustainable agriculture, a research station affiliated with the state university, and a thriving multi-generational operation. Sophia's laboratory had been expanded and modernized, now run by Thomas's daughter, who had inherited her grandmother's passion for soil science. The methods Sophia had pioneered were taught in agricultural programs across the West. Her published works remained standard references, and young scientists still made pilgrimages to Ruby City to learn from the woman who had transformed frontier agriculture. Coleman's legacy lived on in the land management practices he had championed and the policies he had helped enact. Idaho's statehood constitution included environmental protections and agricultural support provisions he had influenced. The ranching techniques he had developed and shared freely had helped countless families build sustainable operations. But their greatest legacy was simpler and more profound: a family that understood the value of both knowledge and hard work. Children and grandchildren who approached the world with curiosity and determination, and a partnership that had proved love and ambition could not only coexist, but strengthen each other. On a summer evening in their final years together, when the setting sun painted the mountains the same colors it had on the day they met, Sophia took Coleman's weathered hand in hers and said what she had said 1,000 times before, but never tired of repeating. "You proved to me that love was fertile ground, Cole, that it could support and nourish everything I wanted to grow, not compete with it. Thank you for that gift." Coleman raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with the same reverence he had shown 50 years earlier when first asking her to imagine a future together. "You proved to me that opening my heart again was worth the risk, Sophia. That letting someone in didn't mean losing myself, but finding the better parts of myself I didn't know existed. Thank you for your courage in staying when you could have left." They sat together as stars emerged overhead. Two people who had tested each other as thoroughly as Sophia had tested the soil and found the ground beneath them solid and true, fertile with possibility, rich with everything needed to build a life that mattered. The land spread around them, improved by their care and knowledge, ready to sustain future generations. And in the house behind them, the sound of family laughter and love proved what they had known from the beginning: that the most important discoveries often come from being willing to explore unexpected territory and plant roots where your heart finds home.